An Arab billionaire sneered. "Solve this, and I'll give you $155 million. Nobody believed it, but the maid calmly did the impossible, and his jaw dropped in shock. Please like and comment if you're enjoying this incredible love story. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing romantic tales. The 68th floor of Sterling Tower buzzed with the kind of tension that only accompanied billion-dollar disasters. Adrian Sterling stood behind his mahogany desk, his dark eyes scanning the panoramic view of Manhattan, as if the city itself could provide answers to the algorithmic nightmare that had been plaguing his company for 3 months. At 34, Adrian had built his empire from inherited oil money into a technological powerhouse that dominated markets across 4 continents. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, couldn't hide the frustration radiating from his 6-foot frame. The stubble on his sharp jawline suggested sleepless nights, though his pride would never let him admit defeat. "Sir, the development team is requesting another meeting," his assistant Ben Taylor announced from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. Everyone knew better than to push their demanding boss when he was in this mood. "Tell them I don't want excuses. I want solutions." Adrian snapped his slight accent, making the words sound even more dismissive. "We've thrown 50 million at this problem. Our stock price has dropped 12%, and still no one can crack this algorithm." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Adrian alone with his mounting anger. The quantum encryption protocol his company desperately needed remained unsolved. Despite hiring the best minds money could buy, MIT graduates, Stanford PhDs, former NASA engineers, all had failed spectacularly. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the city that never slept, oblivious to his billion-dollar headache. The irony wasn't lost on him, that the man who could buy anything couldn't purchase the one thing he needed most, a solution. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner humming in the outer office broke through his brooding. Adrian glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 11:47 p.m. The cleaning crew was making their nightly rounds, invisible workers who maintained the pristine environment where fortunes were made and lost. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Ben with more bad news. Instead, a young woman entered, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard grey uniform of the cleaning company. Something about her posture caught his attention. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed oddly out of place. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and educated. "I can come back later if you prefer." Adrian studied her for a moment. Most cleaning staff avoided eye contact with executives, but this woman looked directly at him with intelligent brown eyes that held no trace of intimidation. "Interesting. No, go ahead," he said, turning back to his computer screen where lines of impossible code mocked him. "I'll be here all night anyway." As she began dusting his bookshelf with methodical precision, Adrian found himself stealing glances at her. There was something almost meditative about her movements, as if she found peace in creating order from chaos. Unlike the frazzled energy of his highly paid employees, she radiated a calm competence that was oddly soothing. "You work late hours," he observed, more to distract himself from his problems than out of genuine interest. "Night shift pays better," she replied without looking up. "And it's quieter, less complicated," something in her tone suggested. And she knew about complications. Adrian found himself curious despite himself. "What's your name?" "Lena Carter," she said simply, moving to clean his desk area. Her eyes inadvertently fell on his computer screen, where the impossible algorithm code was displayed in all its maddening complexity. Adrian noticed her pause, her cloth hovering over the surface of his desk. "Problem?" he asked sarcastically. "Don't worry, you won't break anything, though at this point, I'm not sure it could get any worse." Lena's eyes were fixed on the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is quantum encryption," she said quietly, almost to herself. Adrian's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" She seemed to realize she'd spoken aloud and quickly looked away. "Nothing, sir. I should finish and let you work." But Adrian was standing now, his full attention focused on her. "No. What did you just say about quantum encryption?" Lena's cheeks flushed slightly. I recognize some of the mathematical patterns. I used to study computer science." "Used to?" Adrian moved closer, his business instincts suddenly alert. "Before becoming a janitor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Life doesn't always follow the plan, Mr. Sterling." There was steel in her voice now, and Adrian realized he'd touched a nerve. "Good. In his experience, people revealed their true nature when pushed. This algorithm," he said, gesturing at the screen, "has stumped teams of PhD mathematicians for 3 months. It's cost my company millions. But you think you recognize it?" Lena's eyes met his directly. "I didn't say I could solve it. I just said I recognized the pattern structure." Adrian felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation he got when sensing weakness in a business negotiation. Here was an opportunity to either expose this woman's pretensions or something else entirely. "Tell you what," he said, his voice taking on the smooth, dangerous tone that preceded his most ruthless business moves. "If you're so confident about patterns, here's a challenge." He pulled out his phone and transferred funds with a few quick taps. "I just put $155 million into an escrow account. Solve this algorithm, and it's yours." Lena stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Mr. Sterling, I think you're not being serious." "I'm always serious about money," Adrian replied, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "You have 1 hour. Solve what MIT's finest couldn't and walk away richer than most small countries. Fail and admit you're just another janitor with delusions of grandeur." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Lena's cleaning cart seemed to mock the absurdity of the situation, a billionaire offering a fortune to a woman who cleaned toilets for minimum wage. "Why would you do this?" Lena asked quietly. Adrian shrugged, though his casual gesture belied the intensity in his eyes. "Call it entertainment. I'm tired of watching expensive experts fail. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone with nothing to lose takes a shot." Lena looked at the computer screen again, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, a hardening of resolve that transformed her face completely. "1 hour?" she asked. "1 hour," he confirmed. Lena moved to his chair and sat down with a confidence that made Adrian's pulse quicken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she began typing with a speed and precision that immediately told him he'd made a terrible mistake or discovered something extraordinary. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, her previous deference completely abandoned. The transformation was so complete that Adrian wondered if he was witnessing an elaborate con or something far more intriguing. "The core issue isn't the encryption itself," she murmured, her voice taking on a completely different cadence, analytical, confident, with undertones of excitement. It's the Quantum Entanglement Verification Protocol. Whoever designed this was thinking in classical terms about quantum behavior. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, her previous deference completely abandoned. The transformation was so complete that Adrian wondered if he was witnessing an elaborate con or something far more intriguing. "The core issue isn't the encryption itself," she murmured, her voice taking on a completely different cadence, analytical, confident, with undertones of excitement. "It's the Quantum Entanglement Verification Protocol. Whoever designed this was thinking in classical terms about quantum behavior." Adrian moved behind her chair, watching lines of code appear and disappear faster than he could follow. The scent of her shampoo, something clean and understated, reached him, and he found himself oddly distracted by the graceful curve of her neck as she worked. "You're debugging 3 months of work in real time," he observed, his voice closer to her ear than strictly professional. "I'm not debugging," Lena replied without looking up. "I'm rebuilding. Your team was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The mathematical foundation was flawed from the beginning." Her confidence was mesmerizing. This wasn't the hesitant janitor from 20 minutes ago. This was someone who spoke the language of advanced mathematics as fluently as she breathed. "Where did you learn to code like this?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious now. Lena's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. "MIT Computer Science and Applied Mathematics, double major. Graduated summa cum laude." The casual way she dropped this information while completely rewriting his company's most challenging project struck Adrian as either massively arrogant or entirely truthful. Either way, he was fascinated. "MIT," he repeated. "And you're working as a janitor because sometimes brilliant people make catastrophically stupid personal decisions," Lena said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, like trusting the wrong person with everything they've built. There was a story there, and Adrian found himself wanting to hear it. In his experience, the most interesting people were those who'd fallen from great heights and survived. "Betrayal," he guessed. Lena's typing never slowed, but he caught the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. "Business partner, also my fiancé. Amazing how efficiently someone can destroy your life when they have access to both your heart and your bank accounts." The bitter edge in her voice was unmistakable. Adrian felt an unexpected surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. "He stole from you?" "He stole everything," Lena said simply. "Company, patents, reputation, investment capital." By the time I realized what was happening, he'd positioned himself as the genius behind our innovations, and me as the pretty face who'd gotten lucky with connections. Adrian studied her profile as she worked the strong line of her jaw, the focused intensity of her expression, the way she commanded the computer like it was an extension of herself. Nothing about Lena suggested someone who'd gotten anywhere based on looks alone. "Your patents?" he asked quietly. "Blockchain security protocols. 3 of them now worth about 200 million combined." Lena's laugh held no humor. "Turns out love makes you sign documents without reading them carefully." "Jesus," Adrian breathed. He'd heard of similar cases, brilliant innovators destroyed by trusted partners, but hearing it from someone currently earning minimum wage while casually revolutionizing his company's code created a cognitive dissonance he wasn't prepared for. "Almost finished," Lena announced, her voice returning to its professional tone. "Your quantum verification system needed to account for temporal variance in entangled particles. The algorithm was assuming static behavior in a dynamic environment." Adrian blinked. I understood maybe half of that. You don't need to understand it, Lena said with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. You just need it to work. The smile transformed her completely. Suddenly, he could see the confident MIT graduate she'd once been, the brilliant innovator who'd built something worth millions. It also made him acutely aware of how beautiful she was when she wasn't hiding behind the protective shell of someone society preferred to ignore. There, Lena leaned back in his chair. Run the verification protocol. Adrian moved to look over her shoulder at the screen. The code was elegant in a way that spoke to mathematical beauty rather than mere functionality. Even with his limited programming knowledge, he could see the difference between this and the clunky attempts his team had produced. He executed the verification sequence, hardly daring to breathe. Numbers scrolled across the screen in patterns that had eluded his experts for months. And then, impossibly, incredibly, the system displayed two words that had become the holy grail of his company's efforts: verification successful. Holy shit, Adrian whispered. Lena stood up from his chair, smoothing down her grey uniform with hands that were perfectly steady. The escrow account information should arrive in your email within the next few minutes. The transfer will complete automatically once the system passes all verification tests. Adrian stared at her. You actually did it. I told you I recognized the pattern structure, Lena said mildly, as if casually earning $155 million was a typical Tuesday night activity. Lena, Adrian said, and something in his voice made her look at him directly. This is going to sound insane, but I need to ask. Are you really a janitor? She tilted her head, considering the question. I really clean offices for 8 hours a night, 5 days a week. I really live in a studio apartment in Queens that costs 60% of my income. And I really haven't used my MIT education professionally in 3 years. But you're not really a janitor, Adrian pressed. Lena's smile turned sad. Mr. Sterling, when you lose everything that defined who you were, you become whatever pays the bills. Tonight, I was a janitor who happened to solve your algorithm. Tomorrow, I'll go back to being a janitor who's rich enough to quit, but probably won't, because honestly, I have no idea what else to do with myself. The vulnerability in her admission hit him unexpectedly. Here was a woman who'd just demonstrated intellectual capabilities that would make her invaluable to any tech company in the world. And she sounded lost. You could come work for me, Adrian said impulsively. Lena laughed, but not unkindly. Mr. Sterling, you just handed me enough money to retire. Why would I want to work for someone who settles corporate disputes by throwing around 9-figure challenges? Because, Adrian said, moving closer to her, I suspect you're the kind of person who needs to create things, and I'm the kind of person who makes creation possible. For a moment, something electric passed between them. Lena's eyes widened slightly, as if she was seeing him, really seeing him for the first time. Adrian felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fascinating woman standing in his office at midnight, having just turned his world upside down. Then Lena stepped back, breaking the spell. I should finish my rounds, she said quietly. Congratulations on solving your algorithm problem, Mr. Sterling. She moved toward her cleaning cart, but Adrian caught her arm gently. Lena, have dinner with me tomorrow night. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. You're asking your janitor on a date. I'm asking the most brilliant woman I've ever met to dinner, Adrian corrected. The fact that I met her while she was emptying my trash can is just interesting timing. Lena studied his face for a long moment. Mr. Sterling, we both know this is a terrible idea. Probably, Adrian agreed. But I haven't been this intrigued by anyone in years, and after tonight, I suspect you might be worth a few terrible ideas. 24 hours later, Adrian found himself in the unprecedented position of being nervous. The Michelin-starred restaurant he'd chosen for dinner suddenly seemed too formal, too much like the ostentatious displays of wealth that had probably surrounded Lena during her previous life, and that had ultimately betrayed her. He'd changed restaurants 3 times before settling on a quiet Italian place in the village, expensive enough to show respect, but intimate enough to actually allow conversation. As he waited at their reserved table, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, he wondered if Lena would even show up. The hostess approached with a woman Adrian almost didn't recognize. Gone was the grey uniform and practical ponytail. Lena wore a simple black dress, elegant without being flashy, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She moved with the same quiet confidence he'd glimpsed the night before, but now it wasn't hidden beneath the anonymity of service work. She was absolutely stunning. "Mr. Sterling," Lena said as she reached the table, and there was amusement in her voice at his obvious surprise. "Lena," he managed, standing to pull out her chair. "You look incredible. You look like someone who wasn't expecting his janitor to clean up well," she replied with a slight smile. Adrian felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I deserved that." As they settled into their seats, Adrian found himself studying her more openly. The woman across from him bore little resemblance to the service worker he'd met last night. Her posture was different, her expressions more animated, as if she'd been wearing a costume she'd finally taken off. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said after they'd ordered wine. "Did you really have 155 million just sitting around to throw at a random challenge?" Adrian laughed, and the sound was more relaxed than he'd felt in months. "Define sitting around. But yes, I could access that amount relatively quickly." "Why that specific number?" she asked, thoughtfully. "It seemed large enough to be meaningful, but not so large as to be impossible. I was trying to calculate how much someone like you might consider worth the risk of looking foolish." "Someone like me?" Adrian repeated. "You mean arrogant and reckless?" Lena tilted her head, studying him. "I was thinking more like successful enough to take calculated risks and confident enough to bet against conventional wisdom." Her assessment was surprisingly generous, and Adrian felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "That's a nicer interpretation than I expected. I'm generally not in the business of insulting men who've just made me financially independent," Lena said with dry humor. "Though I have to admit, the way you offered that challenge was impressively dramatic." "Impressively dramatic," Adrian mused. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should. Most people with your kind of money are boring, all calculation, no instinct." Lena took a sip of wine, and something in her expression shifted. "Actually, that's not fair," she said softly. "Most people I knew with money were boring." "Past tense?" Adrian asked quietly. "Tell me about him, your partner." Lena's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. "Ethan, what do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to share." For a moment, Lena looked like she might deflect the question. Then she seemed to make a decision. "We met in graduate school," she began. "Brilliant programmer, charming. Came from money, but acted like he'd rather be judged on merit than family connections. I thought that meant he had integrity." Her voice remained steady, but Adrian could hear the careful control beneath it. "We started working together on blockchain protocols during our final year. The chemistry was incredible, both intellectual and personal. By graduation, we were engaged and had our first provisional patent. What changed? Adrian asked. Lena was quiet for so long that he wondered if she would answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I found out he'd been systematically documenting our work sessions, editing the recordings to make it appear like he was leading all the innovation, while I was just following along. He'd been building a case that the intellectual property was primarily his for over a year. Jesus, the patents were filed in both our names, Lena continued. But the supporting documentation told a different story. When our startup began attracting serious investment interest, Ethan used that documentation to convince investors that I was a liability, brilliant but unstable, prone to taking credit for collaborative work. Adrian felt anger building in his chest. How did he get away with it? Lena's laugh was bitter. He was very good at his job, and I was very good at trusting him. By the time I realized what was happening, he had investors, board members, and even some of our employees convinced that I was delusional. Your own employees? Ethan was charismatic, she said quietly. He made people feel valued, appreciated. When he started suggesting that I was becoming possessive about work that was clearly collaborative, they wanted to believe him. Lena met Adrian's eyes directly. It's amazing how quickly people will accept a narrative that absolves them of having to choose sides. Adrian thought about his own employees, his own board members. How easy would it be for someone with the right skills to manipulate perceptions? Probably easier than he wanted to admit. What happened to the patents? Adrian asked. Bought out of my stake for significantly less than market value, Lena replied. The board voted. Ethan abstained, of course, to avoid a conflict of interest. Her tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. I was given 30 days to accept their offer or face a lengthy legal battle with people who had significantly more resources than a suddenly unemployed computer scientist. You could have fought. With what money? Lena's voice was sharp but quiet. Ethan had made sure I looked unstable and potentially litigious. No law firm wanted to take the case on contingency, and I couldn't afford to pay up front. She shrugged lightly. Sometimes the house wins, Mr. Sterling. Adrian studied her face, searching for bitterness or self-pity. Instead, he saw something else. Hard-won acceptance. You started over, he said softly. I tried to, she admitted, but reputation follows you in tech. Ethan had been very thorough in his character assassination. Every job interview felt like an interrogation about my previous difficulties with collaborative work environments. So you became a janitor. I became invisible, Lena corrected. There's a difference. She took a slow breath before continuing. As a janitor, no one expects brilliance. No one wants to hear your ideas. No one asks about your past or your potential. You just exist in the spaces between other people's important lives. The sadness in her voice was almost unbearable. Adrian felt anger tighten in his chest, not at her, but at the world that had failed her. He wanted to find Ethan and make him pay for every slight, every theft, every moment of doubt he'd planted in Lena's mind. But you're not invisible, Adrian said firmly. Not to me. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Sterling, Adrian, he corrected quietly. And I mean it. What I saw last night wasn't just technical skill, it was artistry. The way you approached that problem, the elegance of your solution, that's not something you can fake or steal. Adrian, Lena said carefully, and his name sounded different in her voice. Warmer, more personal. I appreciate what you're saying, but have dinner with me again tomorrow night, Adrian interrupted. Lena blinked. We're having dinner right now. Different dinner. Different restaurant. Same conversation, but deeper. Adrian leaned forward slightly. I want to know more about how your mind works. I want to understand what drives someone to rebuild their entire life from the ground up. And honestly, he paused, his voice softening, I want to spend more time with the most interesting person I've met in years. You barely know me. Then let me fix that. Lena stared at him, and Adrian could practically see her brain working through the implications, the risks, the complications, the potential fallout. Finally, she spoke. This is complicated, Adrian. We come from completely different worlds now. 3 days ago, that might have been true, he said. But yesterday you made yourself $155 million richer. Which world do you belong to now? Lena considered this. I honestly don't know. Then let's figure it out together. Something shifted in Lena's expression, a crack in the armor she'd spent years building around herself. Okay, she said quietly. One more dinner. Good, Adrian said, and his smile was genuinely warm. Because I have a feeling we're just getting started. As if on cue, Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. What is it? Adrian asked. Lena's face had gone pale. Ethan, she said quietly. He wants to meet. The coffee shop Ethan had chosen was deliberately neutral, a chain establishment in Midtown that suggested neither wealth nor poverty, just carefully calculated anonymity. Lena sat across from the man who had once been her entire world, studying the face she'd once kissed goodnight every evening, searching for any trace of the person she'd thought she'd loved. Ethan looked exactly the same, perfectly groomed brown hair, expensive but understated clothing, the kind of smile that had once made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Now, it made her skin crawl. You look well, Lena, Ethan said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of warm concern that had once comforted her during late-night coding sessions. Really? Well, she said flatly. Cut the act, Ethan. What do you want? His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Straight to the point. I always admired that about you. Lena felt her jaw clench. You have 30 minutes before I leave. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating expression she'd learned to recognize too late. I heard about your recent windfall, $155 million for solving an algorithm. Impressive. The words hit Lena like ice water. How did you hear about that? Lena, you solved a problem that had been stumping Sterling Dynamics for months. Word travels fast in our circles. Our circles, she repeated flatly. I clean offices for minimum wage, Ethan. We don't travel in the same circles anymore. Don't we? Ethan's smile took on a predatory edge. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found yourself a very wealthy patron. Adrian Sterling is quite the catch. Lena's blood turned cold. Have you been watching me? I keep tabs on former business associates, Ethan said smoothly. It's just good practice. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that my brilliant former partner was working as a janitor in the very building where one of my potential investors operates. Potential investors? Ethan's smile widened. Sterling Dynamics has been evaluating our latest blockchain innovations for a possible partnership. Fascinating coincidence, don't you think? Lena stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. You orchestrated this? I orchestrated what? You getting a job cleaning his office? You solving his algorithm? You having dinner with him last night? Ethan shook his head with false regret. Lena, you always did have a tendency toward paranoid thinking. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment, Lena felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Then she remembered Adrian's reaction to her solution, the genuine surprise and respect in his eyes. Ethan couldn't have faked that. "What do you want?" she asked again. Ethan pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "I want you to look at this." The screen showed a contract-dense legal language that Lena's trained eye could parse quickly. It was a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement specifically related to quantum encryption algorithms. "This is my signature," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From our original partnership agreement," Ethan confirmed, Section 15, subsection C. "Any innovations related to quantum computing or encryption developed during our professional relationship remain subject to joint intellectual property claims for a period of 5 years post-dissolution." Lena felt the world tilt. "I never agreed to that. Your signature suggests otherwise." Ethan's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "Of course, at the time, quantum encryption seemed like a distant possibility. We were focused on blockchain protocols. You added this clause after I signed." "Prove it," Ethan said, smiling razor-sharp now. "The document is properly notarized, legally binding, and filed with the appropriate authorities. Any court would uphold it." Lena's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "Even if this were legitimate, I didn't develop anything for you. I solved Adrian's algorithm independently." "Did you?" Ethan tilted his head thoughtfully. "Because I have documentation suggesting that some of the foundational work you used in that solution was developed during our partnership. Specifically, the temporal variance calculations that made your breakthrough possible." He was right, and they both knew it. The mathematical framework she'd used had been part of theoretical work they'd done together 2 years ago, work that had seemed purely academic at the time. "You can't prove I used that framework." "I don't need to prove it, Lena," Ethan said smoothly. "I just need to suggest it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Think about what happens when Sterling Dynamics discovers that their brilliant new consultant might be legally obligated to share her innovations with a competitor. Think about how that affects their willingness to work with you." Lena felt sick. "Adrian isn't working with me professionally, isn't he?" Ethan's eyebrows rose again. "Because my sources suggest he offered you a position with his company just yesterday. And the timing of your dinner date certainly suggests a professional relationship with personal benefits." The way he said it made Lena feel dirty. "You're disgusting. I'm practical." Ethan's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You cost me 18 months of development time, Lena. 18 months of having to recreate innovations that were rightfully mine. I'm simply recouping my losses. Those innovations were mine." "Prove it," Ethan said again, and the repetition was like a slap. "In court, with lawyers, while Sterling Dynamics watches their potential partner become embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute." Lena stared at him, understanding finally dawning. "You want money. I want what's fair," Ethan said smoothly. 50% of your recent windfall seems reasonable, 77.5 million, as compensation for the foundational work that made your solution possible. "And if I refuse?" Ethan's smile returned bright and terrible. Then I file an injunction preventing you from using any algorithms that incorporate shared intellectual property. I leaked the story to the tech press about the legal dispute surrounding Sterling's quantum encryption solution. And I make sure every potential employer in the industry knows that working with Lena Carter comes with significant legal risks. The threat was comprehensive and devastating. Even if Lena could eventually prove her case in court, the process would destroy any chance she had of rebuilding her career or her relationship with Adrian. "You bastard," she whispered. "I'm a businessman," Ethan corrected. "And unlike you, I learn from our past mistakes. I don't let emotions cloud my judgment anymore." Lena's phone buzzed with a text message. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. "Hope your meeting goes well. Dinner tomorrow still on." The simple message, with its assumption that she was strong enough to handle whatever Ethan threw at her, almost broke her heart. Adrian had no idea what kind of legal and professional nightmare he was about to inherit by association. "I need time to think," Lena said. "Of course." Ethan stood smoothly, leaving exact change for his coffee on the table. "You have 48 hours to transfer the funds. After that, I file the paperwork and contact the press." He paused at her shoulder, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper again. "Oh, and Lena, you might want to think carefully about what you tell Adrian about this conversation. Men like him don't appreciate complications, especially complicated women who come with legal baggage." Ethan walked away, leaving Lena alone with the contract and the devastating realization that even her escape from his influence had been incomplete. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Adrian. "Actually, why wait? Free for dinner tonight." Lena stared at the screen, her heart breaking. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, "Something's come up. Rain check." The response came immediately. "Everything okay?" Lena typed yes and immediately deleted it. Then no, and deleted that too. Finally, she turned off her phone and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the contract on the table like the poison it was. She had 48 hours to choose between destroying Adrian's trust or destroying her future. Either way, Ethan would win again. Adrian sat alone in his office at Sterling Tower, the city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about Lena since the night before. Her story, her brilliance, her pain, everything about her lingered. Ben Taylor entered quietly. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Adrian frowned. "At this hour?" Ben hesitated. "It's Ethan Ward." The name hit Adrian like static in the air. "Send him in." Ethan walked in with the confident stride of a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of appearing harmless. "Mr. Sterling," he greeted smoothly. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Adrian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I'm not in the habit of meeting competitors after midnight. You'd better make this quick." Ethan's smile didn't falter. "I'll be brief. This is about Lena Carter." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ethan placed a sleek folder on the desk. Inside were neatly printed contracts, legal documents dense with clauses and signatures. "She and I co-founded a company years ago," Ethan said lightly, "Ward Technologies. She contributed to a number of our research frameworks, including temporal variance calculations. Unfortunately, she's now using those same frameworks in her recent collaboration with you." Adrian's eyes hardened. "You're accusing her of stealing your work?" "Not at all," Ethan said smoothly. Just reminding you that some of what she's leveraging falls under joint intellectual property. I'd hate for Sterling Dynamics to find itself entangled in a lawsuit. Adrian flipped through the pages, expression unreadable. And you came here. Why? Because I respect what you've built, Ethan said. Because I know you can't afford reputational damage, not with the SEC. Already watching your last acquisition. Consider this a courtesy visit. Resolve it quietly, before the media gets involved. He smiled, extending his hand. I'm sure you understand the importance of protecting your interests. Adrian didn't take the hand. Instead, he rose slowly, every inch the predator he was. My interests, he said softly, are already protected. Ethan's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Then you'll understand when I do what's necessary. You do what you need to do, Adrian replied. But understand this, you're not the first man who thought intimidation could buy him power. And you won't be the last to learn how wrong he was. Ethan's smile returned thinner this time. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. He turned and left, the echo of his shoes fading down the corridor. When the door finally closed, Adrian exhaled slowly, fury simmering just beneath the surface. He picked up his phone. Ben, he said, get legal on standby and contact Dr. Evelyn Brooks at MIT. I want confirmation of Lena Carter's academic and research records, everything tied to quantum variance frameworks. Ben hesitated. Sir, do you think she... I don't think, Adrian cut him off. I verify. The next morning, Adrian was in his office again when his phone rang. The caller ID read Dr. Evelyn Brooks. He answered immediately. Dr. Brooks, thank you for calling me back. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that belonged to someone who had seen decades of academic politics. I understand this is about Lena Carter, she said. Yes, I need to verify some claims that have surfaced. There was a pause. Claims made by Ethan Ward, I assume. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened. So you've heard from him? More times than I'd like, Dr. Brooks replied dryly. He's been trying to pressure MIT into reclassifying certain research projects as joint work. We've reviewed the documentation extensively, and it's nonsense, she said firmly. The section he's referencing, Clause 15C, was inserted post-signature. Forensic analysis confirmed the document was altered after Lena's original submission. Adrian exhaled, relief flooding through him. So her ownership of those frameworks remains exclusive, Dr. Brooks confirmed. In fact, she filed independent continuations on 2 of the theoretical frameworks a month after leaving Ward Technologies. Those continuations were approved. She has full legal and ethical claim. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle. Thank you, Doctor. You've been incredibly helpful. Tell Lena I said she deserves better mentors next time, Dr. Brooks added dryly. Some of us still remember brilliance when we see it. Adrian smiled faintly. I will. When he hung up, his anger had sharpened into focus. He picked up another line. Ben, get corporate security and PR. I want a background file on Ethan Ward, past deals, press connections, legal counsel. If he's planning to start a smear campaign, I want it dead before it breathes. Yes, sir. Adrian leaned back, staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel like his battlefield, it felt like his responsibility. He wasn't just protecting a company anymore, he was protecting someone who deserved a future. That night, Lena stood on the balcony of her small apartment in Queens, the cold wind biting against her skin. Her phone buzzed, an incoming call from Adrian. She almost didn't answer, but then she did. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," Adrian replied. "Rough day?" "You could say that." He paused. "I had a visitor today. Ethan Ward." Lena's heart stopped. "What did he tell you?" "Enough to make me angry, but not enough to make me doubt you." Silence. "Then you believe me?" "Completely," Adrian said. "And just so you know, Dr. Brooks called me. She confirmed everything. The documents were altered. You own your work, Lena." Lena felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. For the first time in years, someone believed her without question. "I didn't want you dragged into this," she whispered. "Too late," Adrian said softly. "I'm already in it." And Ethan Ward just made the worst business move of his life. The next evening, Adrian drove straight to Lena's apartment in Queens. The building was quiet, the kind of place that hid more stories than it revealed. When Lena opened the door, she looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, hair pulled back loosely, an oversized sweater hanging from her shoulders. "Adrian," she said softly, "you shouldn't be here." He stepped forward without hesitation. "Ethan came to see me today." Lena's face went pale. "What did he tell you?" "A very convincing story about shared intellectual property and legal complications." Adrian moved closer, his tone steady, his gaze unwavering. "A story that would have worked perfectly," he continued, "if I hadn't also spoken to Dr. Evelyn Brooks from MIT. Lena froze. "Dr. Brooks called you?" "She called to warn me about Ethan's patent, the way he spent 3 years sabotaging your career. And she offered testimony proving your algorithm is entirely your own work." Lena blinked, disbelief flooding her expression. "But the contracts are incomplete," Adrian said firmly. "The documentation Ethan uses conveniently omits the supplemental agreements that establish your independent ownership of the mathematical frameworks." "I don't understand," she whispered. Adrian reached for her hands, noticing how cold they were, despite the warm apartment. "Lena, you've been legally in the right this entire time. Ethan has been committing fraud for 3 years, and no one ever called him on it because his victims couldn't afford to fight back." Her legs seemed to give out, and she sank slowly onto the couch. "That's not possible." "It's not only possible," Adrian said quietly. "It's documented." He sat beside her, lowering his voice. "My legal team reviewed everything this afternoon. Ethan has no legitimate claim to your work. But the companies that blacklisted me," she said faintly, "the ones that wouldn't hire me, they were scared off by his lies." Adrian leaned forward. "Lena, he's been systematically destroying your reputation with legal threats he could never back up." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a whisper so fragile it almost broke him, 3 years. I've spent 3 years believing I deserved what happened to me. You didn't deserve any of it." Lena looked at him, and in that moment, something shifted in her expression. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Adrian said, "we destroy him." Her eyes widened. "Adrian, my legal team is filing charges for fraud, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships." He took her hand again, intertwining their fingers. "By tomorrow morning, Ethan Ward's career will be over." Lena stared at him, speechless. Then, softly, "And us?" The question hung between them like fragile glass. "Us," Adrian said, his voice low, "is entirely up to you." He paused, then added quietly, "But Lena, I need you to know something. He shifted closer, eyes locked on hers. What I feel for you has nothing to do with algorithms or business or solving impossible problems. It has everything to do with the fact that you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Adrian, I've been so scared. For 3 years I've been scared of hoping for anything better. You don't have to be scared anymore, Adrian said. He moved closer, his voice soft but certain. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena reached for him, and when she kissed him, it tasted like freedom. 6 months later, Lena stood in the boardroom of what used to be Ward Technologies. Now, it bore a new name, Carter Innovations. The federal investigation had been swift and brutal. Once one victim came forward, dozens followed. Ethan's empire collapsed overnight. Dr. Brooks joined Lena at the window overlooking the financial district. Hard to believe it's really over, the older woman said. Sometimes, Lena admitted, I still wake up thinking it was all a dream. Brooks smiled. Good dreams have been rare for you, haven't they? Lena nodded slightly. And how are things with your young billionaire? Lena's cheeks warmed. Adrian's not that young. And things are complicated? Complicated how? Dr. Brooks teased. Last I heard, he offered you the position of Chief Innovation Officer at Sterling Dynamics with a salary that would make most CEOs weep. He did, Lena said quietly. And I turned him down. Doctor, Brooks raised an eyebrow. Dare I ask why? Because I need to know I can succeed on my own before I build a life with someone else. I spent 3 years believing I was broken. I can't jump from that straight into depending on Adrian's success to define my worth. Dr. Brooks smiled softly. And what did he say to that? Lena's lips curved. He said, and I quote, "That's the most beautifully stubborn thing I've ever heard. When you're ready to take over the tech industry, I'll be here." Sounds like a keeper. He is, Lena said, smiling. Did I mention he helped me secure funding for my own startup? As an investor, not a boyfriend, Lena said firmly. Strict boundaries. And how's that going? 3 patents filed, 2 major clients signed, and a development team of 12 brilliant women, all of whom have been burned by men like Ethan at some point in their careers. Lena's voice carried a satisfaction that had been missing for years. We're calling it Phoenix Innovations. Perfect name, Dr. Brooks said. Lena was about to reply when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Adrian. Dinner tonight. I have news. She texted back. Good news or bad? The reply came instantly. Depends on how you feel about marriage proposals. Lena froze. Dr. Brooks, reading over her shoulder, laughed out loud. Well, she said, I'd say that settles whether he's willing to wait. Lena's hands were shaking as she typed, That's not funny. The reply came instantly. Who said I was joking? Dinner at 8. Lena excused herself, heart pounding, and called him directly. He answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not actually planning to propose tonight, she said. I'm actually planning to propose right now, Adrian replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Over the phone seems less romantic, he added, but I'm surprisingly nervous about waiting until dinner. Adrian, Lena Carter, he said, you are the most brilliant, stubborn, incredible woman I've ever known. You rebuilt your entire life from nothing. You created a company that's already changing the industry. And somehow you managed to fall in love with a workaholic billionaire who didn't know what happiness was until he met you. Lena felt tears rising. You make me want to be better than I am, Adrian continued. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You solve impossible problems before breakfast. I love your sarcasm, your determination, your terrible habit of working until 3 in the morning, and the way you look at me like I'm worth something more than my bank account. Adrian, she whispered, I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your company. You don't need saving. I'm asking you to build something with me, something bigger than either of us could create alone. There was silence. Then Adrian said softly, So, Lena Carter, will you marry me? You can't propose over the phone, she said through her tears. I can do whatever I want, Adrian teased gently. I'm a billionaire, remember? Besides, he added, you still haven't answered the question. Lena wiped her eyes. Ask me again at dinner. Is that a yes? That's a bring a ring and find out. Adrian laughed, a sound warm and alive. Challenge accepted. 8 hours later, Lena sat across from Adrian in the same Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation. He'd chosen the same table, and somehow the familiar setting made everything feel like coming full circle. Nervous? Lena asked, noticing how he kept checking his watch. Terrified, Adrian admitted. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this. Good, Lena said, with a teasing smile. I'd hate to think I was easy. Easy is the last word I'd use to describe you, Adrian said, smiling back. He reached across the table and took her hand. Ready for your official proposal? Actually, Lena said softly, I have something to say first. Adrian's expression shifted. That sounds ominous. 6 months ago, she began quietly, I was cleaning your office, believing I was worthless. You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. You didn't just give me money or opportunity. You gave me back my sense of possibility. Lena, I'm not finished, she interrupted gently. You could have used my desperation to make me dependent on you. Instead, you pushed me to become independent again. You could have made our relationship about gratitude or obligation. Instead, you made it about choice. She stood up from her chair, walked around the table, and pulled something small from her purse. So before you propose to me, she said, dropping to one knee beside his chair, I'm proposing to you. Adrian's mouth fell open as Lena opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple platinum band that shimmered under the candlelight. Adrian Sterling, she said, her voice steady despite the moment's wait, you are infuriating, generous, brilliant, and absolutely terrible at taking no for an answer. You've made me remember who I was before Ethan, and you've helped me become someone even better. She took a slow breath. You challenge me. You support me. You make me laugh. And you've never once made me feel like I need to be smaller to make room for your ego. Adrian's throat tightened. Lena, he whispered, I'm asking you to build a life with me, she continued, not as my savior or my patron or my business partner, but as my equal, as my best friend, as the person I choose to love for the rest of my life. She held up the ring. So, Adrian Sterling, will you marry me? For a moment, Adrian just stared at her. Then he started laughing, deep, joyful laughter that turned heads across the restaurant and made Lena's heart feel lighter than it had in years. Yes, he said, pulling her up from the floor and into his arms. Yes, absolutely, definitely yes. When he kissed her, the entire room seemed to fade away. When they finally broke apart, Adrian was grinning through the disbelief. Though I should mention, he said, I also brought a ring. Show me, Lena challenged. Adrian pulled out his own small box, revealing a stunning solitaire diamond that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Lena Carter, he said formally, will you marry me back? That depends, she replied with a grin. Are you prepared for a lifetime of me being right about algorithms? I'm prepared for a lifetime of you being right about everything, Adrian said, as long as you're prepared for a lifetime of me pretending to argue about it. Deal, Lena said and kissed him again. Later that night, they walked hand in hand through the city that had witnessed both her downfall and her rebirth. The lights of Manhattan sparkled around them, soft, alive, almost conspiratorial. Any regrets? Adrian asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Lena considered the question seriously. About Ethan? About the 3 years I lost? About everything that led me to that office building the night I met you? She stopped walking and turned to face him. Not a single one, she said firmly. Because every terrible thing that happened led me to you. And this us is worth all of it. Adrian laughed softly. Even the part where I was an arrogant ass who challenged a janitor to solve an impossible algorithm? Especially that part, Lena said with a laugh. Though, for the record, I was never really a janitor. No, Adrian said, smiling. You were a brilliant woman, waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she was. Lena stood on her tiptoes and kissed him one more time. Thank you for being my moment, Adrian Sterling. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And thank you for being mine, Lena Carter. They walked home together, planning a wedding, a future, and the kind of love that rebuilt everything it touched. And as the city lights shimmered ahead of them, Lena realized something she'd almost forgotten. Sometimes, the best love stories begin with the ending of everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes, you have to lose yourself completely to discover who you were meant to become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who sees your potential, even when you've forgotten it exists, someone who doesn't save you, but stands beside you while you save yourself. Lena squeezed Adrian's hand and smiled toward the skyline, ready for whatever impossible challenge tomorrow might bring.